Good afternoon and welcome to Wisconsin Literacy's Winter Virtual Conference. My name is Michelle Erickson and I'm the Executive Director for Wisconsin Literacy, Inc. And as you can see from your screen, Wisconsin Literacy is a nonprofit statewide coalition supporting 70 literacy agencies. And in partnership with our members, we strengthen literacy through professional development opportunities, personalized consultations, health literacy, workforce connections, and networking and advocacy. So I am really pleased to introduce our first session, sharing our mission to open the fundraising door. But before I do, I want to briefly share some advocacy updates. Next week, the governor will share his 2-year state budget with the legislature. The members of the Joint Finance Committee will then decide how the final budget looks that will be voted on by our state legislators. And I want to thank some of you for attending the governor's listening sessions in December and January. And sharing your work and some of the talking points that we shared with you. And there will be more opportunities to do this coming up in March and April as the Joint Finance Committee goes on the road to 4 cities, which we are waiting still yet to hear where those cities will be. And we will be back in touch. But members of that committee, the Joint Finance Committee, have shared that hearing directly from the students who you serve will be the most powerful message that we can send before the budget decisions are made. And I want to thank you again for the data that you share with us every year, because that has allowed us to tell our story about literacy statewide in Wisconsin. So Wisconsin Literacy has been actively working and advocating for additional state funding so that we can better share these funds directly with all of you. And depending on the state agency that funds us and the grant requirements attached to that funding, we've been able to pass along more direct support and digital resource support in the last couple of years. We are advocating now to increase this opportunity and sustain it into the future. And we need your help as the voice of adult and family literacy to more boldly and more frequently share the life-changing work that you all are doing. I have to say that witnessing some of the growth and the increased capacity in the new ways that you are serving tutors and students as we come out of this pandemic has been so rewarding for all of us at Wisconsin Literacy. So thank you for guiding over 14,000 adults forward to continued learning and better job opportunities. And I'm really excited today by the Winter Conference lineup for our regional staff has put together for all of you. Each day this week, there are opportunities to learn how to build your agency's capacity, better serve adult learners, and partner with other organizations in your community. So I hope you can join as many sessions as possible, and I'm sure you will be glad you did. Okay, I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Jen Davis, for our session this afternoon. Jen Davy is a passionate fundraiser, active community member, mom, and avid festival goer. Jen has over 15 years of development and fundraising experience in the nonprofit community, working with budgets ranging from $20,000 to $5 million. She is the owner of Jen Davy Consulting, LLC, a consulting firm specializing in building the foundation of development offices. This includes annual funds, grants, monthly giving, database management, and special events. Jen has created success in fundraising by implementing processes and strategic planning throughout organizations. Jen's strengths are creating processes, managing projects, coaching, and writing. And she focuses on long-term growth and success in fundraising that leads organizations to sustainable fundraising practices. She has consistently supported organizations in aligning their marketing, donor stewardship, and planning processes. And with this focus, organizations have seen steady and consistent growth in their development efforts. Jen is a certified fundraising executive, and most recently became an AFP master trainer in 2018. Jen has been a board member of the Greater Madison Association of Fundraising Professionals, the University of Wisconsin-Platteville College of Business Industry, Life Science, and Agriculture Alumni Chapter, and the University of Wisconsin-Platteville Alumni Association Board of Directors. She is currently an active volunteer with the Sun Prairie Emergency Food Pantry and serves as a head coach for Madison Starlings, which is a nonprofit volleyball club. So thanks so much for joining us today, Jen. We are really grateful to have you here and to hear this really important message for agencies on fundraising. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate the introduction. All right, I'm excited to be with you all today. I'm going to share a PowerPoint just so you don't have to look at me the entire time, but hopefully I'll still show up as a little square there so you know who's chatting with you today. So again, Michelle, thank you for the introduction. Thank you to the whole team for putting together this conference and giving you all space to learn and just work on professional development. So I'm excited to be here today with you all. So as I said, I'm going to go through this PowerPoint. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering on the PowerPoint. That being said, I'll make sure I share it with staff so that if you want to have it, you can have it afterwards with us. So we will work through this. I was really hoping we'd all be back in person for your conference. And I love being in person with people and being able to share this and answer any questions. So I know some of the team are going to watch the chat, and if there is a question that we can pause and answer as we're going through this, please drop it in there and we'll be watching it. And if not, we'll just kind of circle back to a couple of those at the end of the presentation. So again, very excited to be with you all. Wish I could see all your faces in the room. So I'm just going to go with that. You're all here and excited to hear today. So thank you. Okay. All right. All right, before we get started again, Michelle gave you like a quick background of me, but I just want to add just a couple more things is I love my job. I love working in the field of fundraising. I love being able to share these opportunities with people. It is what I know and what I've always done for a career. So I'm really excited to do it. I really appreciate being able to teach and share kind of the theories behind why we do what we do, and hopefully try to make it easier for all of you. So if you have questions today, please jump in and we will pause. At the end, I'll also share my contact information and stay on a little bit longer if we have other questions as we go. So fundraising for most is not easy. So I want to point out that you're not alone. If you are not like me and you don't love this work and it's not your favorite part of your job, so you're not alone. There are many people who immediately respond to, you know, I don't love fundraising. I don't love this work. I don't love this part of it. So know that. And then hopefully by the end, things are a little bit easier for you, and we can make you feel maybe a little bit more positive on what is fundraising and what can we do. So the other thing I want to point out is just to start simple. So we're just going to walk through some ideas, ways to increase your comfort level with fundraising. And throughout this, I'll hopefully keep reminding you that you can start simple. So wherever you are in your budget, that's okay. So just know that you can tweak this for where you're at and where your comfort level is and build up to wherever you'd like to be. So again, please just know that as we work through the presentation today. So what we're going to just be kind of talking about is the difference between what fundraising is and fund development. And we're going to talk about a variety of tools that we can use and how we can make sure that those are working for our fundraising initiatives. So what tweaks could we make? We're going to make sure that we're matching our mission with our fundraising and how that can hopefully help you feel more comfortable in using the words that I enjoy fundraising. I enjoy this work. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And again, just really excited to be with you all going through this. So I wanted to start today with a little bit of statistics and figures on fundraising and what the landscape is looking like in our community. So you can easily search statistics in giving, and you'll find a plethora of people who have done significant research on this sector. So our industry and our sector definitely touches, almost every community, every part of the way that we go about our lives. So I think it's really important to just kind of have some background on this. So this report is coming in through Giving USA. They do this report each year for it. It doesn't change drastically any year that they publish these reports. I think maybe I've seen giving by foundations be 20% or 18%, but not drastically in terms of our sources of contributions. So as you can see, the biggest source of contribution is individuals. So that is where my preference is that we spend most of our time is talking to individuals about gifts and ways that they can be involved in our organization. That being said, I always want to make sure that we are real clear about the other three categories are giving by foundations, giving by bequest, and giving by corporations. Each one of those giving decisions is determined by an individual. So even though giving by individuals is 67%, all of our other categories are actually still determined by an individual. So an individual will make those decisions for their money on where to give it. So the only exception would be obviously foundations and corporations. Sometimes those might not be their direct pocketbooks that they are giving money from. So as we talk through kind of ways to do this, even if you have a focus on foundations, corporations, whether that be grants or other ways to involve them, it's very important to remember that all of that is managed by individuals. So when we are looking to diversify our funds, all of the strategies that we employ will be usable in all of the various categories of sources that we've got here. All right. Some other kind of general statistics that I just wanted to share and point out. And again, if you Google statistics about giving, you will get statistics in any part of the field that you want to know more about. So if you are searching for something specific to talk to your board about, talk to your staff about, please utilize the internet there and get some statistics that really speak to what you're trying to do. I think it will help all of us kind of lift up the profession and the work that we're doing if we're using these stats. And somebody was generous enough to do that research for us. So a couple here that I pulled out just to talk about is those making less than $50,000 a year give more in relation to their total income than those in all other income ranges. So I brought this one up because most often when we talk about fundraising, we have a tendency to think about who can give millions. That's often what makes the news. That's often what's put out there. So we will get names that are well known, Mackenzie Scott, Oprah Winfrey, any of those big names that I think often create a barrier between what we feel like we can do on the team or somebody who's participating in fundraising. Those people are hard to get in touch with, right? So I put this up here because, again, individuals are making an impact in our work. And those at this level here are giving consistently and giving meaningful gifts. They are worth us investing back in them in these multiple ways that we'll talk about. So again, wanted to really bring that forward. The second one is, again, statistically, the average donor in the United States is 64 years old and makes 2 charitable gifts a year. So I think this is important to remember that this is an average of that. So while we can employ certain strategies to really bring in different groups of people, this is one that we do know is giving. in this category again. So important to remember. And then also they makes 2 charitable gifts a year. When we think about the work that we have to do throughout the year, oftentimes it can feel overwhelming, like we have so much to do, we've got to get in front of everybody, we've got to do this. So on average, this population is making 2 charitable gifts. So just want to kind of set our expectations that we're not looking for one individual to give multiple times a year and be our only source of those gifts. So on average, 2 charitable gifts a year within this range. Others might have more if they're giving monthly giving for us, but this is a good one. The last piece I want to just kind of say is, right, the least likely reason people give is so they can get a tax break. So it is not about taxes for them. There are things that we have to do to make sure that if they want to submit this on their taxes, they are getting all of the credit that they need in terms of thank you letters and acknowledgements, receipts, but people don't give because they can get a tax break. So that is the least likely. You may run into a few offshoots of that where people are, but again, really want to kind of set our expectations here when we're really talking about giving and what that can mean. So fundraising. The definition of fundraising is the seeking of financial support for a charity cause or other enterprise. So when we say we are fundraising, we are talking about the transaction of this, right? We are making an ask, somebody is giving us money, right? And it really is about both the transaction and the money that they are giving this to us. So I think it's just an interesting way to think about, we often will say, we don't like fundraising. And I can agree with that. To the point of, right, this is just a transaction. I'm just asking you to give money to me. And without any other context, I can see where we may not be as open to this. So I'm going to challenge us today to kind of let go of the fundraising piece of it. That is a transactional part. It's a very small part of what we do. And instead, want us to consider this definition: the ongoing strategic positioning of an organization to sustain and grow its resources. So I think that, you know, here we're talking about what's the strategy that we can have and how can we actually sustain and grow our organizations, which I think is a place that all of us really want to be. We really want to see that our organization is able to succeed and grow far beyond us. Whether you're here today as a staff member, a board member, a volunteer in a different capacity, you want this organization to be able to be sustainable and to see growth. Right? We know that we are always tapped for resources. We always are looking to how can we grow, how can we better serve the constituents that we're here for. So I think key phrases here are sustain and grow. So hopefully you can agree to that. Right. And then also by building relationships with those who understand and care about the organization's relevance to the community. So this, in my space, I would call fund development. So again, our fundraising was really about the transactions, right? It's about the money. We're going to ask for funding. We're going to have this transaction of dollars occur, but our work really lies within the space of fund development, right? Can we build relationships with people who understand and care about our organization's relevance to the community? So this is what really brings this back to the mission, is how do we find people who do those two things? How do we find people who understand and people who care about this? I think two key components as we talk about different ways that we can kind of work on fund development and how we can engage in a variety of ways, even if it might not be our full-time job. But if we couch all of our conversations in that Our intent is to sustain and grow our organization and their resources. And we're going to do that through relationships with people who understand and care. I think we'll see more of a growth trajectory with our fundraising than without this. So I really want to kind of focus in on that piece of it and see this as a positive experience, that yes, we are going to have to ask for money. So we're going to get to that piece, but in the meantime, there's a lot of work to do to be able to get there and to be able to have resources for our organization. So before we really, again, jump into all of this, I'm going to ask that we all let go of some what I would consider limiting beliefs about fundraising and open ourselves up to the possibility of that this is a really positive thing. So very specific related to right, fundraising is often we have the belief that there's a limited supply of funds available. And I'll challenge that with you all saying we continue to make money as a society. We continue to find ways to innovate, to have more of this. People also make decisions every day with their funds. So those shift, right? Where they have obligations are shifting daily. So while today it might feel like there's a limited supply from an individual person, understanding when there might be less of a limit on that is a really important piece of our job. So really letting go of that. If today it's a no, because of limited supply from an individual, it doesn't mean that's a no forever for us. So second one here, people hate being asked to give. So this is a response I often get when I talk about like, well, I like fundraising, I like fund development. I think it's a meaningful space that we work, and people will respond and say, well, the people hate being asked to give. And I'll give you that yes, and if we are able to build a relationship and ask when we have permission and when we know that it's okay to ask, they don't hate it, right? So fundraising and fund development are all about building relationships with people. So we really want to understand where in the relationship we are. Similar to if we're talking about moving a friendship more to maybe a formal setting, right? If you consider it something like dating, we don't usually make a lot of asks of our friends or our significant others until we have some sort of speculation that they might be interested in this, right? Because we don't want to hear no, and we don't want them to be offended or upset by our asks. So if we work in the stewardship space of fund development and that relationship building, they won't hate it when we get to that ask point. We have to do this job. So again, right, I'm a firm believer in that we don't have to, right? We can step aside, we can let somebody else potentially do this, but we get this opportunity. We get to come out and share with the community opportunities that would let them opt in to caring about our mission. So what we put out there to folks really impacts how they're going to view our organization, our work, fundraising, fund development, all of that. So if we shift our kind of mindset on that and say, this is something I get to do. I get to do this every day, or I get to do this once a month because of my role, but I get to be a part of this, and I get to have the opportunity to create space for someone else to come into the organization that I care deeply about. So in our framework of how do we share our mission and bring that into fund development work is, how do we create a joyful experience for potential donors? How do we create avenues to build relationships with individuals that will give them the space to say yes when we do get to that ask point? So keeping it all about that mission is the most important, right? So if we If we go away from our mission, we're not giving them the opportunity to engage in what we set out to do. Instead, right, we've drifted with our donor, or we've led them down a path that won't be impactful back to the work that we know is important. So really keeping everything central on this is our mission. So if we can keep this also based on our mission, it is less about the transaction that's happening, the fundraising, that very specific, we're going to ask you to do this thing, you do this thing, and it's over, right? That transaction. But if we keep it about the mission and we find people who care deeply about this and who have some sort of understanding, we can keep talking about the mission and then give them that space to engage. So people always ask them, what can we do? How do we find donors? How do we build relationships? And how do we prioritize this work in the context of everything else that we're doing? So I know many of us on the call today are not specifically fundraisers as a full-time job. So I understand that. And so we're going to walk through some ways that we can utilize other tools to make sure that we are creating space for that. So that big question of how do we find donors? How do we prioritize this? How do we build relationships is a question that I get from almost every organization that I come in contact with. I just had that question come from an organization that has a $5 million budget. So again, you're not alone in asking those questions, regardless of what your budget is or your current capacity is. They're questions we ask all the time. So again, hopefully we'll kind of break that down and move into that space. So I mentioned at the beginning that we're going to start simple. And at any point, we can jump into one of these spaces and shift our focus on these pieces to include donors and prospective donors and really be bringing them in. So while this is kind of like, a line, any one of these will impact our fund development efforts if we're utilizing them in the right way. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the newsletter, the social media, and the special events first, and then talk about the major donors or personal invitations that we could build up to through relationships. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on grants today. I know for many of organizations that are with us, grants are something that's happening. Those are very program specific. They're typically tied to restricted funding. So while most of you are doing those, I think this other piece and these other few pieces are more important to kind of see growth in for it. And we can see our impact maybe a little bit clearer on a couple more of these. So I'm going to jump into some key components of newsletters and social media that we could do to really shift that focus from let me tell you all about everything that's happening at our organization to really shifting to here's how you can engage. So our newsletters, our social media are a part of our fund development work because they give us the voice to show we are here, we are doing this work, and we are making an impact, and we would like you to come along with us. So these two pieces are critical in having that voice out there. I know that social media is not everybody's favorite. I would tell you that we cannot put all of our eggs into any of these baskets and assume that we do one of these things and we will get every potential donor to engage with us and become our donor. So it's a little bit of a mix of all of these, but the important piece here is that we have an open line of communication. So when we talked about building relationships with people, we've got to be able to put out information so that they can respond to us, so that they can react to it, so that they can raise their hands and engage. So if we don't put anything out into the community such as a newsletter or being active on social media, the likelihood that we find people who are curious about us or interested in us is very limiting. So I'll challenge us here to say, okay, what could we do with our newsletters and our social media so that they become invitations and open availability for people to truly, truly engage with us? So some of the key components of a newsletter that would help us move our fund development strategies forward are having a soft ask. So a soft ask is that this is not at the top of your newsletter, it is not your main feature story, but consistently we have the ability for people to give. As they read stories about what we're doing, these successes, both small and large, they're reading these. If they are so moved, there is a space that they can give. Right. So again, we will create an opportunity for them to step in and say yes to us. So really important. So that soft ask is a term that we use within fund development that again is that, I'm not going to bold it. I'm not going to put it at the top, but I'm going to have it there. I'm going to have it available. So if you are, I'm going to read everything. I'm going to scroll to the bottom. I'm going to see that ask. I'm going to know how I could give if I'm so moved from that. Showing success both small and large, I think is really important as it relates to our fund development, that if we consistently only show the really big things that happen and the really big successes, there are many people who can't see then how they can be a part of it. Right? If I know you're doing everything perfectly 100% of the time, and it is great and it is impactful, I am seeing that, that's awesome. And I do care about you, but you've got this completely handled. So if we start showing maybe some of the smaller successes that build up to those large ones, prospective donors or even current donors can really see how they can play a role in that and join in and say, oh, I'm sure there's more to do here, right? We also want to thank our supporters and volunteers through our newsletters. People don't want to be the only people who are giving to you, right? You may have heard that no funder wants to be the sole provider for your organization. They want to know that there's other people supporting this. There's other people who are engaged and care about this. It helps them feel like they're a part of a community that makes sense and they're with like-minded people. So if we can lift up our supporters and our volunteers in those spaces of newsletters, you can do that through your stories of small and large successes. You can do that separately on its own. For some, you may put logos out there. For others, you may tell their volunteer or donor story, but really engaging that there's more people than the few that they might know are part of your organization is really important when donors are considering their gifts to us. So again, sharing progress along those goals, what led to a large success that you had in a program or for a person, really letting us know along the way is important. I have on here a link to the website. So for me, this is a really big component of newsletters, whether they are print or an e-newsletter. Linking back to your website, again, lets people engage with you in stronger ways. Your impact has, your website has all of your branding on it. Your website has donation buttons on it. So you don't have to fill your space with donation buttons or branding, on every single thing if you're linking back to the website, right? If we can drive somebody who says, oh, I really care about this story, let me read more about it, and I go onto the website, I'm going to be more likely to see that donate button that stays at the top of your page. So I read that story, I see the impact, I want to engage, and the donation button is there. So you have a higher likelihood of transferring that interest into a gift when we draw them back to our website. You also probably put a lot of work into your website, so go ahead and utilize it. Go ahead and encourage traffic to flow to your website for it. That's important for it. So talk about impact as well, right? Our impact matters to donors. So how did something change for someone through your program? That impact is important. As people are considering becoming donors, they want to know that this is meaningful, right? I have an understanding of what you do. I kind of care about it, but tell me how it impacts the community. Tell me how it impacts a family. Tell me how it impacts an individual. And again, I have a higher likelihood of engaging with you, of becoming a donor, of supporting this cause. I have a higher likelihood of advocating for you within the community, which again will be part of our fund development strategy and roll into getting more donors for us. So our key components of social media are fairly similar in terms of our social media should link back to the website. So we don't control social media. We don't control the algorithms that are out there on it. So if somebody is on social media, sees something to engage with and brings that back to our website, that again will then let us have a little bit more control in the space of our website, right? We control what we put on our website, we control what they see. So really important that anything we're putting out on social media, can we link back? Can we link back to a larger story that we put into our newsletter? You all probably know this, but utilizing photos on social media is very important to really see what's happening. Social media also is a great place to show the day-to-day operations and the day-to-day successes. So those quick snapshots of, hey, this happened today. We had a big class of learners. We saw higher attendance today because it was finally a sunny day. Whatever that is, again, shows that you're consistently there. Social media is another great place to thank our supporters and our volunteers. Other people will see that. Again, whether they know them or are just acknowledging that there's more people than what they thought who are engaged and impacting your work that's out there. So sometimes newsletters and social media can feel like a really big bite to take, right? When we have other things to do. So I'm a proponent of these two pieces, especially in our fundraising and our fund development efforts, because having these accessible and available to the public are ways that we can drive people to know what we're doing without having to be the one to talk about it all the time, right? We are only going to run into a certain number of people, a certain number of times in the community because we have limited hours that we're dedicating to this. Again, whether it's your full-time job, you're volunteering, or volunteering once a month or once a year, limited hours. So having these means when we run into somebody who says, oh, I'm kind of interested. I know that you're volunteering with this organization, or I know you're working there. Can you tell me more about it? If these two pieces are up to date, it is much easier for me to say, be happy to send you our last newsletter that shares some of the work that we've been doing. So I'd be happy to invite you to follow us on Facebook. We're consistently posting on there, and then you could just learn more about us, and I'm always happy to talk more. But here's two kind of passive ways that are going to be able to send people to show your impact for it. So again, I know this can feel like a lot. So a simple way to do this is really setting a schedule that maybe you'll do a quarterly e-newsletter and you're going to make it in Canva because that is free. That will make it look very polished. So you're going to capitalize on that free resource that's within the community, and you're going to publish that to your website where your staff is already putting together all of this information, and your team, that's all already there. So, right, we're going to link those two things. We're going to use our resources really wisely. And then we're going to slowly share out the articles that were in that e-newsletter onto our social media. So if we have 3 stories in our e-newsletter, and we have one shout out to supporters who helped us. That's 4 separate social media posts that we already have written and we already have linked back to our website. So really important to utilize these spaces and lift up what's really happening in your organization to show the community that you are working on things. One thing I'll get into in a little bit, but I just want to mention it here, is stay positive in all of your writing. So it's really easy to say, you know, things aren't going well, we lost this funding, we really need this, we're not going to make it without you. Any of that negative kind of approach to this tends to have people kind of falter on, is this organization going to succeed? Is this organization really going to be able to do what they're saying that they're doing? So while that might be an internal conversation, externally, we want to make sure that they know that we are working towards it. We're going to make it work. Whatever that looks like might be different. It might take us longer, but really making sure that we're staying positive in all of these outward facing kind of tools is really important. So I just kind of want to mention that before I get too far. I've had organizations that have come at it from a negative, and when we switched our tone to successes and positive, we saw a stronger engagement with our donors. So that doesn't mean we don't share progress. As I mentioned in the newsletter, we don't share the day-to-day, but we just share them in a really positive capacity. So I know many of you are doing special events, so I just wanted to touch base on some key components of special events to consider as you're doing them as it relates to your fund development work. So I think it's really important to think about a special event and understand, how am I going to actually measure success? So what will success look like for this? Is it a fundraiser? So the only measurement of success is if we raise this much money? Is it to raise more friends and potential donors? So it's about who comes into the room. Do we have key people that we need in that room, regardless of if they're a current donor or prospective donor? And if we got them in a room with other people who cared significantly about our mission, that would be a success for us. So when we're doing a special event as it relates to fund development, really understanding what that means for us and clearly keeping it top of mind as we're planning these events. Understanding the time investment. So you will see that some organizations will share that, you know, we made $100,000 on this event, and it will look very appealing for you to do that same event, right? They made $100,000. How could we not implement that at our organization? But be really clear about the time investment that may have gone into that, and understand that not all organizations are sharing the time investment and the cost that's associated with that with their total amount raised. So it's really important to look deep within your organization and say, what kind of time can we really commit to this and do it well? And will that time garner us the success that we were planning on at the beginning of it? Match it to your mission. So I know from talking with some of the staff team that there are many of you that are doing events that are directly related to literacy. So awesome job. That is great. Whatever we can do to make sure that an event ties back to our mission will again make our work easier. So if we are doing a swim competition, because we saw another organization raise money from that, and they garnered a lot of sales from the concession stands, and they garnered a lot of sales from entry fees. So we want to make that money. I would pause deeply and say, when people come to your swim meet, what are they going to learn about you? How are you going to bring your mission into it? So it is likely that literacy And reading in any kind of form will not mix well with water. So maybe something to steer away from that. How would we bring in literacy into this conversation? And how would we make it make sense that when people walk into our event, they understand more and they can find themselves caring more about our mission? So number 4 here is what I believe to be the most important is plan for the next steps for your attendees. So again, what's your measurement of success and what are you really going to do after you have these people together in this capacity? So this is my simplest idea is really just what can you do for those people who are there and plan it out ahead of time. And again, if that's not meeting the success that you're seeing from an event, we may need to reevaluate what that success looks like. So special events can be a great time to bring people into your mission, but if we don't do anything with them next, if we don't plan what the next steps are for them, they will continue to either remain as a special event donor or attendee, and they won't move forward with us to kind of excel at our mission. So I think it's really important that we pause at special events, at newsletters, at social media, and say, what are going to be my next steps if somebody does engage with me in one of these kind of spaces for it? So I want to get obviously really comfortable with talking about fundraising, right? We're eventually going to have to get to that space, but knowing that this is honorable and noble work. So I have some colleagues that have kind of coined that phrase to say that that's what they feel about fundraising. And I agree 100% that our job in fund development is to create a space that matches a donor's interest with what our mission is. And if I can understand that that donor has a clear and direct interest in the work that we're doing, then my job is to work with them to see, would this be something that you'd be interested in funding? And by funding, it could be $100. By funding, it could be 1,000, 10,000. It could be whatever that donor might have accessible. Again, there might be limited now, more later, but our job is to really honor that relationship between a donor and our mission and make sure it's matching and it's fitting. And that's the work that we can do in this space. So how do we match kind of our current activities with donor engagement? Again, going back to our newsletter, our social media, our events, all of those pieces are what will happen when somebody does engage in those spaces? What will happen if somebody asks for more? Are we ready for that? And what might be the next step for them? Who might actually follow up with a thank you phone call and see, why did you give today? What moved you to support our work and understand those stories? I want to spend a little bit of time on the getting permission to ask and actively listening and being intentional. So these two spaces are really important, right? We did all of our work. We put it out there in our newsletter, our social media, our special events, and now we have people that are still maybe prospective donors or might have become a donor, and we think there's opportunity for more. So these two pieces are really bringing that to home and getting comfortable with saying, thank you for doing this. So a genuine thank you. And then a genuine, I'd love to find out more about what motivated you. I'd love to get to know you more. Right? I have an interest in hearing why you gave. So if they accept that offer of, we'd like to know more, we'd like to hear more, we're working towards this opportunity to potentially ask them for another investment. And if we're going to work towards the opportunity to ask them for another investment, we have to make sure we are actively listening and being really intentional about when they say they have an interest, how are we matching it with that? So if we're meeting with somebody who came to one of our special events, who made a donation, we think that there's potential there for more, and we want to see if that's a possibility, we're going to start meeting with them. We're going to start talking to them. We're going to start planning what those steps might look like. So we're going to say, how could we get together with them? Do they come into the office? Are they already engaged in our programming? Do they volunteer at other events? Can I be at some of those programs? Can I be at those other events? Can I be there to start building this relationship with them, to move towards the opportunity to ask them? The only way we're going to move towards that opportunity to ask them is if we're listening to how they feel about our organization, to what their interest is to our organization, and if they have an interest in giving money to the organization. So that in and of itself could be like a 2-day training on getting that permission to ask. But I'll say the permission to ask is not always a verbal, Jen, thanks so much for meeting with me. I really hope you're going to ask me for money, right? It's not always going to be so clear. But when we talk about things like, you've been really engaged in this particular piece of our programming and you've really enjoyed it. And I understand that this is why. And would you consider us talking about ways you might get involved with gifts? That is a way we might be able to lead somebody to say, yeah, I have been thinking about that, right? So we're not coming right out and saying, I'd really like to set up a meeting to ask you to do this thing, because then we've just asked them. So making sure that we're on a path that gives us answers, that we have a general sense that they're interested. We're actively listening in case something comes up that would take us off that path. So if somebody lets we just lost my husband just lost his job. And so, while we still love and care about your organization, he's lost his job. We're going to honor that. And we're going to listen really intently about what that means for their family. So again, how do we honor this work it really is a relationship, and we can pause. So our path of fund development may be stalled. It may take longer because life happens, and we're okay with that because it is about the relationship and not about the money for us. So all of this to say, you can do any of this work by starting with just one conversation with either a prospective donor or a current donor. Can you pause and say, I'd like to understand why they have an interest in our organization, and start meeting with them. Start inviting them to some very specific things that would help move them forward and help you understand why they give, if there's an interest in it. And if they have already given, make sure that they know what the impact of their gift is. So very important for that. So I'm going to challenge you to just do one thing, whether you start with one prospective donor and say, I'm going to find out more and see if there's an opportunity for them to give. One current donor and really understanding why they're giving. One post a month to social media so that when you talk to your current or prospective donors, they know that you're active. They know you're engaged. They know you're working on this mission. One newsletter that could be easily emailed out to multiple people as you meet them, can be shared across platforms and drives everybody back to your website is important, right? So any one of these things would move our fund development efforts forward, because our fund development efforts are about building relationships. So if we keep and hold on to that, we can actually move that that forward and just start simply and encourage people to give. Throughout this entire process, people will become your advocates. If they understand and know what's happening, it's easier for them to share your mission and encourage others to get involved. So I'm going to open it up just for questions. I'm going to glance at the chat, but if any staff have been watching and there's anything in the chat, we can go over.
In the chat, we have a question from Carol. Would you please give examples of a next step for special event attendees?
Yeah, great question, Carol. So if somebody comes to my special event, I would suggest who should follow up with them. So who might have engaged with them? And if the answer is nobody, because we're a very small staff and we were all working, and so we didn't have a ton of time with people, then can I set up another meeting? Can I take them to coffee? So if that's too much, can I send them a handwritten thank you? That's too much. Can I make sure that they get an email thank you? And can I make sure that they're invited to something else? Can I give them some action steps of what else to engage in? So again, if you have limited capacity on your team to do follow-up calls and to try to schedule meetings with the individuals who came to your event, it's okay to automate some of these processes. But is there a couple, two, I'll challenge you to 3 or 4 people that came to the event that we want to say, we saw you, we heard how engaged you were, and that might be by listening to the amount of donation that they gave. But in whatever capacity, we're saying, I'd like to understand more. I'd like to know more from you is really important kind of next steps. So again, if we just leave them to, they hear nothing else from us until the next time they're invited to the event, then that is what they think that we do. What you do is put on this one event every year, and it goes to support something that we don't really know much about. So can we make sure they're on the newsletter list? Can we make sure that they're getting that awareness about what else is happening at our organization? So I hope that helps answer your question, Carol. So I think that you all have another session to jump into at like 1:15, but I think that the team is going to leave this session open for maybe one staff member and myself to stay back, and I am happy to answer questions to you directly. I'm happy to set up time. You heard that I have a consulting business, but please do not let that stop you from reaching out. I love fund development and talking about this, and I'm happy to brainstorm ideas with anybody and share anything that I might be able to know or point you in the right direction. So please reach out.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you everybody for attending, sharing our mission to opening the fundraising door, sponsored by Wisconsin Literacy. So as Jen mentioned, one second here, I'm in the 80s. Share my screen right here. Oh, actually, I'm not. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulty here. But as Jen mentioned, we do have our next session, welcoming our community of adult learners in their workplaces, and that begins at 1:15. I am very happy, though, to stay on in this session for a little bit longer if anybody has any questions. So you can type them in the chat and I'll stay on and monitor the chat. You can unmute and ask Jen. So please don't feel rushed to get to our 1:15 session if you've got some more questions for Jen.
Perfect. Thanks, Beth. We do have a question from Alba here in the chat. Asking, how do I convince board members that special events are not necessarily the best way to raise funds for the organization?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thanks for giving me a little bit of space. So Alba, I hope you are still on with us. But again, this will be recorded if you have to come back to it. So, I'd really look at the return on investment from a special event and go back to what are your real measurements of success? And is that in general what we should be spending time on? So if you identify what those real measurements of success are, then I think, you have a better understanding of if you're meeting them. If their only thing is just so we can do something, that's not the best, right? Evaluation of that. So really pausing and saying, okay, if I get 50 people in a room, I could meet with 10 of them and build a true relationship with them, right? The amount of time that I spend putting on this event, if our whole committee each met with one other person and really talked them through a relationship and understanding why they gave and being there for them, do you think you could garner a more significant gift through that than getting 50 people in the room that makes it so busy that we can't even talk to who's there? So I'd really evaluate that if you're able to. And I'm happy to talk like more specifics again with it. That's helpful too.
Thank you so much, Jen. Anybody else have any questions?
This is Stephanie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. We can hear you.
Okay, I was just wondering, we work with volunteers and there are tutors, but is it appropriate to continue to build that relationship for fundraising as well? Or am I asking too much if I do that? Or I just want your opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. People who volunteer with you are great prospects for donors. So I would, the only thing I would say is make sure that you're honoring that they have already made an investment. So oftentimes I've seen that we again come from that negative and that, well, you're not a donor of ours. But to lessen the impact of what they've already given would be an undue justice, right? So
Right.
really honoring like, I know how much you've given, you're making an impact here. We also have this. So I think that next part of that fundraising is, are you giving them opportunities to engage in those spaces? So, some organizations will say, we're not inviting any of our volunteers, we're doing this special event. If we don't tell them about it, they're going to learn about it from someplace else and wonder, why wasn't I included? Why didn't you want me to participate in that? Because they could be your best advocates. So yes, I would treat every one of your volunteers as a prospective donor from a place of generosity already that they've given.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I think we have a hand up with John Gillenbach.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So kind of just following up on that, I had two questions. So just because it came up this morning, I have some people who are interested in saying, we need to bring back our donor and volunteer recognition events, which we've certainly had on pause lately. And well, quite honestly, the population we serve is sometimes a little more at risk for COVID and things going around. So I'm personally on the fence about whether or not to have those events, because some of our volunteers are not returning in person. They've kind of gone to a virtual setting. So I'm wondering, just if you already got some great ideas, but any more ideas on kind of how to do what used to be all in-person volunteer recognition type events and sort of volunteer donor. And then maybe a follow-up to that. Another idea that came up at a recent board meeting was to have kind of an event for our biggest donors or our foundation donors. And based on what you just said, I'm just kind of wondering what your opinion is on having a foundation donor event versus something for potentially all levels of donors / volunteers, because yeah, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, I might ask some follow-up question, but so in terms of kind of that recognition, I mean, so if you do have a newsletter or different channels to get that out, maybe you don't have to have them all in the same room. So that's kind of a big question of like, does having them all in the same room generate a certain excitement that just could never be replaced? I mean, but so if that's the case, and I will say, right, many of my organizations have had that same question, like, we're still in a pandemic, this is still happening, whether it's pandemic or everybody just gets sick. But people do appreciate being, I think, together again, having that camaraderie. So acknowledging that not everybody will be able to, and acknowledging your capacity. So if you're going to have it, know that some won't come, and do you have a strategy for following up with to like really understand, like, Jen didn't come. She's one of our volunteers who does all this for us, but she didn't come to that event. If we have an answer to why, like, oh, she lives with, extended family and cannot risk that. Okay, right. So it's not personal, so I think, right, just really understanding why you're having it, and if people like will engage, and if not, like, it's okay. So don't write them off. So maybe you have to go above and beyond and spend a little extra time with that one person, because a one-on-one would be great with them, but they're not going to join you at that event. So, and then on the other one, you said a foundation donor event. Are you thinking that is like people who are like foundations who are awarding you grants, that type of event? Can you clarify, John?
Yeah, so many of our foundations are local here in the Milwaukee area, so that is a potential thing. We've never separated that out. So again, in the past, when we've had donor/volunteer recognition, we've invited donors of all levels. So that was kind of a thought, is do we just maybe try to bring in some of these larger donors/foundation representatives? Sometimes the foundations are, trusts and things that are directly connected to literacy volunteers that we either have or have had in the past. Other times it's, much larger foundations. And again, it's just an idea that came up at a recent board meeting. So because we're on the topic, I thought I'd get your opinion on that, because I'm on the fence as to whether that's too exclusive to be worth our time. I've kind of been thinking the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for clarifying that. So I would say, yeah, it's going to be work for you. And like, so what benefit would they have? What benefit are you giving them to be in a room with each other? Is that a benefit that, they know, maybe you already are recognizing them, that they're not the only funder. So they already know that. So they may not need to be in a room, but having them in a room with your other donors and your volunteers might inspire them more, right? Because these are like-minded group of people. So I think that would be the question is, if you got together a group of like-minded people, what would you hope would be your outcome of that? And I think in terms of recognition, they're probably going to a lot of things. So one-on-one meeting with them would probably be more impactful for you to like get some time with them. So setting up coffee or tea, to have a thing that most people do on a daily basis is probably less that'll get you further than trying to orchestrate a giant event where not all of them are going to come, because they're going to say, I see so-and-so at this fundraiser and this fundraiser and this fundraiser. I don't need to be in another room with them. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. I can't see the participants when I'm sharing my screen. So if anyone else has a hand raised, Shannon, please let me know. We've got one question here in the chat. Funders seem to be focused and shifted funding priorities to funding direct level services such as food banks, and many do not see literacy something worth funding. How do we change this mindset?
Yeah, good question. So first I would say, ultimately, like you cannot specifically say, I'm going to change the way that you think about this. However, I'm a strong advocate for, again, we are going to make sure that the public can access our information about what we're doing. So we're going to make sure that they can see that we're making an impact, that we are helping people change their lives. So I'm a big advocate of really centering in on the community that you're serving and helping them get to wherever they're going. So not making the donor the hero, not making, so everybody is involved. So your staff is involved, the people that you serve. So I think if you put all that out there, right, this is the success that we're seeing. This is how we're partnering. This is how we're engaging. Those who are open to it, those who understand and care will come and join you. But I don't think, just like in general, we're not going to change that mindset. And it's not a negative mindset, right? They are supporting, and we are all in the nonprofit sector serving many of the sometimes same clients or similar participants, right? So like the good of the community raises us all up. So go ahead and celebrate and let them fund that. And then when they're looking for something else, just make sure you're available, that you're there, that you've been present, that you've been showing that you've been doing work. So again, why are some of those things like newsletters and social media? That's where people are going to go and say, I didn't know anything about them. And if it looks that I can't see any history, I'm going to say, did they just start? Like, what's going on? Or did they stop? Are they not actually doing this work? Because I'm going to go to those resources to find out. And especially at the larger funding, like a funding organization, they're going to be looking for places like that for those resources of what's happening in the organization. Beth, I'm going to just jump in. There's another question. Is there a way to do a combination virtual and in-person appreciation meeting? Absolutely. So, we could have all been together. I could have been with the, Wisconsin literacy staff. So we could have done that. I would say you want to just make sure that you have the right tools for it, right? If you're going to do one that's virtual and in person, that you're really clear about how virtual is going to be able to engage, that you have the right tools, that virtual attendees can hear what's happening, or are they only gonna, be mic'd in for the presentation part and, that's it. It's extra staff or volunteer time to run a combination meeting. I would say that most people who have done it respond and say it's pretty much that you're hosting two events at the same time. So being prepared for that, but it's definitely doable depending on your, technology services and what it looks like. But just be really clear about what people are getting in each of those spaces and if they're happening at the same time or different.
Fantastic questions, everybody. Thank you so much. And Jen, thank you so much for these answers. Again, I'm not able to see the participants, so does anybody have a hand raised? All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And I can just echo what Jen said. I have worked with Jen for many years, and I know that she would be very happy to get questions by email also. So Jen, thank you so much for presenting to our group today. We really appreciate your time. And I hope to see everybody on our 1:15 session.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.